The Jewish Holocaust, an Islamic perspective. The Holocaust, Crimes Against Humanity.
The oppression against Jews continued throughout antiquity, at the hands of the Assyrians, Babylon, and Romans, who massacred and exiled Jews and destroyed their temples and cities. In medieval times, Jews were once again targeted, labeled, discriminated against, and chased away from wherever they took shelter. And during World War II and the years leading up to it, many innocent Jews were subjected to great barbarity and genocide. Millions of Jewish civilians were heavily tortured and suppressed in the Holocaust that went down in history as an example of the ruthless dimensions of barbarity.
This is one of the gravest tragedies in history, yet many countries were apathetic and indifferent. It took some time for the United States to take action. The United Kingdom was aware of what was happening and nevertheless followed a policy that emboldened Hitler.
Today the picture is different. In the West, the Holocaust has achieved the status of being affirmed in legislation of many countries. However, this is not the same case in the Muslim world today. In a wide geography of the Islamic world, there is indifference against the Holocaust, which has resulted from ignorance or a one-sided propaganda.
As Muslims, it is very important to make the Islamic world aware of the reality of this unprecedented tragedy, that is, the Holocaust of the Jewish people. Today, it is critical to revive the tenets of Islam that require upholding justice, protecting the oppressed, and showing mercy and compassion towards the innocent.
The lack of information on how dreadfully the Jews were massacred in concentration camps and gas chambers during the Holocaust leave many Muslims unaware and indifferent to this awful brutality. So, it is upon us, Muslims, to put the facts of history to light on this historical crime against humanity.
Der Völkerstreit oder Hass untereinander, wird gepflegt von ganz bestimmten Interessenten. Es ist eine kleine, wurzellose internationale Clique, die die Völker gegeneinander hetzt, die nicht will, dass sie zur Ruhe kommen. Es sind das die Menschen, die überall und nirgends zu Hause sind, die nirgends einen Boden haben, auf dem sie gewachsen sind, sondern die heute in Berlin leben, morgen genauso gut in Brüssel sein können, übermorgen in Paris, und dann wieder in Prag oder in Wien oder in London und die sich überall zu Hause fühlen. Es sind die einzigen, die wirklich als internationale Elemente anzusprechen sind, weil sie überall ihre Geschäfte betätigen können.
The Nazis targeted the Gypsies, the mentally and physically handicapped, Poles and Slavs, as well as the Jews for extermination. From 1941 to 1945, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime systematically repressed large sections of the society and regarded them as enemies of the regime. Estimated 12 million people lost their lives as a result of the Nazi massacres of civilians. Of these, 6 million were Jews, up to 750,000 Gypsies and the remaining Slavs living in countries like Poland, the Ukraine, Russia, and Yugoslavia. The total number of those who died in World War II is a staggering 55 million, and this includes both military and civilian casualties.
In the face of such atrocity and facts, it is impossible to deny the Holocaust that remains as one of the most evil lawlessness and villainy in the history of mankind.
Nazi propaganda against the Jews.
The Holocaust did not occur in a vacuum. It was predicated upon a foundation of anti-Semitic beliefs and occurrences whose legacy remains to this day. Hitler used his ideological propaganda method systematically at every occasion. Consequently, before the systematic genocide of the Jews by the Nazis, the German society was brainwashed with hatred and hostility against them.
Propaganda tries to force a doctrine on the whole people. Adolf Hitler wrote in his book Mein Kampf in 1926, he advocated the use of propaganda in order to spread hatred against the Jews and other minority groups. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Hitler established a Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda headed by Joseph Goebbels. The aim of this black propaganda machine was to spread throughout Germany the enmity against the Jews and other minority groups that were targeted, the undesirables as they were coined.
Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden.
Therefore, even before coming to power, and because of the brainwashing of the German people against the Jews, the Nazis, street gangs known as the SA stormtroopers, had already staged attacks on Jewish homes and businesses.
Once the Nazis came to power with Hitler's directives, the SA initiated full-scale attacks on the Jews, and anyone or anything that was Jewish or belonged to the Jews. An elderly Jew walking down the street or a little Jewish child on the way to school could easily be assaulted by the brutal Nazi gangs without any questions being asked.
The Nazis also initiated a boycott aimed at Jewish shops and businesses. All over Germany went up posters portraying the Jews as terrible and ugly monsters, and carrying slogans reading, "Don't buy Jewish goods." In September that same year, a law was passed prohibiting Jews from owning land. In November, Jews were banned from being newspaper editors. Further laws were passed in 1934, excluding Jews from trade unions and health insurance, and banning them from working as lawyers or judges. In 1935, all Jews were expelled from the army. Under the Nuremberg laws of 1935, Jews were no longer able to work in many areas of German society. Such prohibitions extended to social life as well by forbidding Jews from marrying Germans. In 1937, Jews were no longer permitted to be teachers, doctors, or dentists, on the cruel pretext that they will physically or spiritually poison the German people.
In 1940, the anti-Semitic film The Eternal Jew was screened in movie theaters all over Germany.
Foreign from us Europeans, born of totally different racial elements, they differ from us in body and above all in soul.
In schools, teachers warned their students of the so-called Jewish menace, and during lessons, Jews were wickedly insulted and maligned.
It's not a secret that Nazi Germany focused its attention on earning the support of some Muslim leaders as well during the Second World War. For this end, they employed similar propaganda tactics in some countries around the Middle East. Radio Berlin was started Arabic and Persian radio broadcasts with the aim to create hostility against Jews.
The chain of events that led to the final solution.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
The war years and the start of the genocide on March 15, 1936, Nazi armies invaded Czechoslovakia. On September 1, they invaded Poland. Great Britain and France declared war, and World War II had begun. The invasion of Poland brought a new dimension to the twisted Nazi ideas known as the Jewish problem.
In the areas occupied by Nazi Germany, in Random, Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow, the Nazis confined the Jews to ghettos, always in the poorest areas of the neighborhoods with no infrastructure, in dilapidated buildings with about 10 people in every room, and deported the Jews to newly constructed forced labor and concentration camps. All Jews were forced to wear yellow stars of David on their clothes so they could be immediately identified. It was now easy to mark, single out, and target the Jews. Reinhard Heydrich, head of the Gestapo, was so brutal that he was coined the Butcher of Prague. He gave orders for the SS Special Action Units, death squads, mobile killing units known as Einsatzgruppen A, B, C, D, to find every Jew in the occupied territories. Thus began the manic-obsessive Nazi drive to comb Europe, intercept every Jew, deport him, and murder him.
To sum up, in the first 2 years of the World War II, Hitler or his allies had captured most of the continent of Europe, from the French coast to Moscow, from Denmark to Greece. Shortly before their collapse in 1945, the Nazis initiated a ruthless genocide campaign in all their occupied regions.
Life and death in the ghettos. The largest of the ghettos was that in Warsaw, the capital city of Poland. The poorest areas of the district were set aside for Jews and Jewish residences from all the other parts of the city. The Jews were now forcibly moved into the ghetto.
Before they were put inside, all their money and valuables were taken from them. Life in the ghetto went on under terrible conditions.
Life in the ghetto was horrendous. Death stalked the streets of the Warsaw ghetto. which was eternally gripped by fear.
Very little food was given, and everyone lived on the edge of starvation.
As Jews were given only 184 calories a day, an average of 8 to 10 people were crowded into one room inside dilapidated buildings.
Every day, those living in the ghetto could be subjected to various forms of abuse from Nazis. An average of 100 people a day died from hunger, sickness, or maltreatment.
The final solution, setting up the extermination and concentration camps.
At the beginning of 1942, Hitler and his staff, in their sick mindset, decided on a final solution to the Jewish problem. That meant the systematic extermination of all Jews, and leaving not one Jew alive in territory controlled by the Nazis. In accordance with the horrifying decision, the concentration camps were turned into extermination camps.
Jews from all the countries occupied by the Nazis were transferred to these camps by SS units specially assigned to this task.
The official story was that the camps were to employ them as workers. But when they arrived, most were killed at once, and the rest later after having been used as forced labor. Even the process of transporting the Jews to the camps reveals the inhuman cruelty the Nazis inflicted. Jewish families were rounded up from their homes or the ghettos at gunpoint with blows and abuse, and crammed into railway cars that they had earlier carried animals or goods.
The death camps.
In the camps where the worst Nazi savagery was carried out, some 11 million people lost their lives, proving how monstrous and ruthless people who turn away from religious moral values and silence the voice of their consciousness can be.
The concentration camps were first set up as labor camps. Almost all, and Auschwitz in particular, were opened alongside major industrial complexes. Detainees who were brought to the camps were forced to serve the German war machine as slave laborers in these industrial areas. Nazi ideology did not restrict itself to the pragmatic oppression, but turned these camps into sites with the sole purpose of exterminating all the undesirables, as they were coined.
During the 3 years or so between the last months of 1941 and the end of 1944, a total of 11 million people, of whom 5.5 million were Jews, were killed in gas chambers and by other means, or as died of starvation, disease, and mistreatment.
The Nazis had no compassion for infants and innocent children whose sole crime was that they were Jewish. For the old, the wretched, the handicapped, and the sick, and the henchmen set about exterminating these victims with sadistic brutality. The Nazis' hatred of religion.
The memoirs of Jews subjected to brutal Nazi fanaticism contain passages that show the Nazis' hatred of religion.
A Jew with a beard and earlocks who was wearing a black kaftan and a hat could be easily targeted, singled out, and marked. Members of the SS and other Nazi groups mercilessly intercepted devout Jews, especially the elderly in the streets, brutally tearing and cutting their beards and earlocks, which are important symbols of faith for an ultra-Orthodox Jew. They burned and tore up Jewish holy books and Torah scrolls, and torched and burned thousands of synagogues. The destructive propaganda against the Jews that began with Hitler's rise to power in 1933 filtered itself into many areas of influence in so many parts of the world.
Nazi propaganda techniques were not limited only to radio. They prepared some training programs for the youth in the Islamic world to be raised as holding the Jews as enemies. It is evident that the oppression against the Jews is not only the heinous genocide perpetrated against them. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance to keep this in mind and to awaken people who are ignorant of such wickedness. A counter-educational program to give the facts of the history of the Jews and how they were maltreated, along with in-depth study of the Holocaust and how it is continuing today by means of other tactics is of absolute necessity. Regrettably, 2/3 of the present world population have either not heard about the Holocaust or denies it. Denial or indifference about such a tragedy is worrisome, and it is a moral responsibility on those who are knowledgeable about the facts. Under the influence of biased teachings and hate indoctrination against the Jews, some Muslim groups have become so predisposed to deny this terrific atrocity. In fact, the denial of the Holocaust is the denial of historical facts and ignorance of a dreadful massacre inflicted upon an innocent community. The Jews had no intention to enter into war or attack the nations they were citizens of. On the contrary, they were a part of the society in European countries.
Jews were farmers, tailors, seamstresses, factory hands, accountants, doctors, dentists, lawyers, teachers, and small business owners. Some families were wealthy, others were poor, and by the early 30s, with the rise of the Nazis to power in Germany, the Jews became potential enemies. During World War II, every single human right was violated under Nazi rule, and this escalated with the hateful indoctrination of the Nazis against the Jews. The Nazis implemented a reign of terror. Exposed to ever-present cruelty of the Nazi regime, the world became a place of hitherto unseen savagery.
Even today, there are still some anti-Semitic actions taken against the inoffensive Jewish community. In order to prevent a similar tragedy from ever happening again, a worldwide collaboration is exceedingly important. Muslims should also lead a common cultural effort against groups that are in denial of the Holocaust with intellectual means. These knowledgeable Muslims should explain to those who are unaware the policies that paved the way for one of the most terrible sufferings and disasters on mankind. Why is it so important to acknowledge and not deny the Holocaust? The reason is so that if in the future any such massive and devastating atrocities ever take place, whether to Jews or other groups, people will hopefully have learned and will not suppress their conscience to remain silent bystanders witnessing horrible sufferings, no matter what group is oppressed or wronged, be it Jews or anyone else. They can bravely stand up to injustice using the power they get from their faith in God. A true Muslim should never accept being a bystander to such tyranny. Thus, the insensibility of some in the world regarding the Holocaust is the result of lack of proper education, the ongoing black propaganda and misinformation. For these reasons, the people of the good conscience need to work. We need to instill courage, resoluteness, and honesty to stand up against evil ideologies, and we need to prompt and awaken people who are unaware.
Mr. Adnan Akhtar. As a Muslim, he describes the brutality of the Holocaust for the Islamic world in many languages, such as Persian and Arabic. Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, who survived the Holocaust when he was only 8 years old, was a guest of Mr. Adnan Akhtar on A9 TV.
Sayın Başhaham İsrail Meir Lau, kendisi 10 sene kadar İsrail Devleti'nin Eskenazi Başhaham olarak görev
Efendim,
almış.
hoş geldiniz, sefa geldiniz, şeref verdiniz. İnşallah hayırlara, güzelliklere, iyiliklere vesile olur. Evet, inşallah bölgede bir güzellik, huzur, neşe ortamı olur. İnşallah bizler, sizler de vesile olursunuz inşallah. İnşallah Tevrat'ta belirtilen, Peygamberin hadislerinde belirtilen Kral Mesih'in, Moşiyah'ın, Mehdi'nin devrindeyiz inşallah. Evet. Çok güzel günler olacak inşallah. İnşallah. Bu acı günler bir daha olmayacak inşallah. Bu Holocaustlar güzel, tatlı günler olacak. Bakın Başhaham Efendi'nin o zamanlar böyle sevimli, tatlı bir çocukmuş o zamanlar. Zoom yap yavrum, zoom yap, iyice zoom yap, yaklaştır. Yaklaştır.
First of all, I want to thank for the kind hospitality
Çok teşekkür ederim
and for the invitation to come and to meet.
Çocukluğundaki 1 yaşındaki hali tek fotoğrafı.
Holocaust'tan bir tek Başhaham Efendi kurtulmuş. Annesinin babasının hepsine hayatlarına son vermiş. O zamanın gaddarları.
Evet, yine çocukluk döneminden. İsrail'e 8 yaşında kurtarıldıktan sonra geliyor Amerikalılar tarafından, Nazi soykırımından. 5 yaşından 8 yaşına kadar kamplarda kalıyor. Kamplardan kurtarılan en genç Musevi. Çocukluk resimlerini görüyoruz burada.
Evet. Mübarek Kudüs-i Şerif'te inşallah o ufaklıklarda olacak, o sevimlerde hep birlikte olacağız inşallah. Müslümanlar, Hristiyanlar, Musevi kardeşlerimiz hep beraber birlikte olacağız inşallah.
All together, evet. Jews, Christians and Muslim brothers will be all together in the Jerusalem with your grandchildren. There's little kiddies will be there inşallah.
Çok güzel günler göreceğiz inşallah.
We will see very nice days, beautiful days.
Geldiğiniz için teşekkür ediyorum yine. Hürmetler ediyorum. Sağ olun, var olun.
Muslim community leaders, whether political or religious, have an important duty in that regard. The Muslim leaders should give a thorough explanation to their communities about this atrocity and that Islam would never allow such hatefulness or persecution. They should inform their communities that any Jew or anyone who is under affliction should definitely be protected and guarded by Muslims according to the Quran. They should participate in the process of eradicating such unjust hostility against Jews as a responsibility on our conscience.
אני מאמין, אני מאמין, באמונה שלמה. I believe with full faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even if it may tarry, it may take a while, with all of that, I'll still wait for that incredible day when He will come.